Greber. Communication with the Spirit World. 59. Part 2. The laws governing spirit communication with material creation. 60. Introductory remarks. I have come to realize that everything that God has ordained is eternally valid. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken away from it. God has arranged it thus so that we may revere Him. Ecclesiastes 3:14. Already at my first contact with the spirit world I was promised that I would be taught about the laws governing the ways in which communication by spirits with the material world and especially with mankind takes place. The fulfillment of this promise would be for me a new and incontrovertible proof of the truth of what I had previously learned from this source. I myself knew nothing of those laws. Still less could the mediums, who were inexperienced in all branches of science, know anything about such laws, hence they were unable to impart any teachings on the subject from their own knowledge. The promise given to me was kept in a far greater measure than I had dared to hope. The instruction I received about the laws relating to communication with the spirit world exhibited a clarity and a power of conviction inherent to truth only. All my questions were answered exhaustively, down to the last detail. Never did I find the slightest contradiction in what was taught me. Everything meshed, as in the mechanism of a high-quality clock. My teacher was the same spirit that on the occasion of our second meeting had promised to initiate me into every truth, and it used the same boy as its medium as then. The fact that the boy had only an average education also gave credence to the words of the Apostle Paul, God has chosen that which the world calls foolish to shame the wise, and the things the world calls lowly and contemptuous have been chosen by God to bring to naught that which looms large in the eyes of the world. For no mortal shall be able to boast of his own accomplishments before God. I Corinthians 1:27-28. You mortals, so the Spirit began its teachings, seem to assume that only the world of matter is subject to laws. That is a mistake, for God is a God of law and order in spiritual as well as terrestrial creation. In His doings He Himself observes the laws He made, disregarding none of them. Thus we spirits too must observe the laws of nature ordained by God whenever we wish to communicate with the material world. This is true for the good as well as the evil spirit world. 61. You are in the habit of calling everything a miracle that you cannot explain with nature's laws as you know them. For those familiar with the forces acting in the material and the spiritual world, there is no such thing as a miracle. For everything happens according to the same immutable laws, not one of which supersedes or changes another. If you lift up a stone with your hand, the law of gravitation, as you call it, acting on the stone is not thereby set aside, but it is overcome by the greater force of your hand. If, however, a stone were lifted up by a hand invisible to you, you would consider that a miracle because you would not see the force, and hence would think the stone was rising of its own volition. And yet in both cases a force must be present that causes the stone to be lifted. Whether you can see the force or not does not affect the process itself. In either case the force of gravitation acting on the stone is overcome by a stronger force. Even God Himself, in consequence of the laws enacted by His own omnipotence, cannot make a stone raise itself. He might indeed have made matter subject to different laws, but having made the laws governing all earthly events as they are, He too must, when a stone is to be lifted, implement a force that is greater than that of the gravitation acting upon the stone. The same thing is true in all fields. There is also nothing miraculous going on when the spirit world communicates perceptibly with you mortals and speaks to you. Whenever I speak to you through this boy, I do so according to fixed laws, which I am bound to observe and which would have to be observed in the same way by any evil spirit wanting to speak through him. Consider your telephones. How many of nature's laws must be complied with before a conversation can take place? You must have a current. Wires and other elements required for the transmission of speech must be installed. They must correspond to the laws of electricity and of acoustics. It makes no difference whether the telephone is used by a good citizen or by a criminal, both are subject to the same laws of telephone communication. In order that you may understand the things you will witness in the domain of spirit communication, it is important that you learn the most important laws involved in communication between the spirit world and material creation. When you have grasped these, you will be able to understand most of what you will encounter in this field, things that so far seem so inexplicable to you mortals. 60 To the law of odic force life force, because of their different natures, spirit and matter cannot act upon each other directly. Not even your own spirit is capable by itself of activating a limb or organ of your body. Not even I, who have taken possession of the body of this boy, can make his body sit up or raise his hands or produce a sound with his organs of speech by my own efforts alone. In order to do these things, your own spirit and I as well require a power current. In the same way, the operator of a machine requires a constant supply of power furnished by steam or electricity if his machine is to function. If that supply is lacking or is inadequate, the machine will stand still. In our case, the spirit is the machinist. The machine is the body or matter. If the matter is to be set in motion by the spirit, a power current is necessary. The learned men of old called this power current in human beings the soul, as distinguished from spirit and body. Thus they taught, quite correctly, that man is made up of spirit, soul and body. The Bible calls the power current or vital energy the breath of life. And God breathed into man's nostrils the breath of life, thus man became a living being. Genesis 2:7. Scientists of today call the power current in man the odic force. This odic or life force exists in and around all things created by God. Every human being, every animal, every plant, every stone, every mineral, all water, every heavenly body, every spirit and all other existing things possess odic force. It is nothing material, but is spiritual and always associated with a spirit. It is the life force of the spirit, which is therefore always its conveyor. Hence, wherever there is life, there is odd, and wherever there is odd, there is spirit. Since this odic force exists in and around all things created by God and is always associated with spirit, it follows that there is a spirit in everything created. That sounds incredible to you, yet it is the truth. Any spirit associated with a material body possesses, first of all, the odic force required for its own existence as a spirit, and next, sufficient additional odic force to induce life, growth and activity in the earthly body. Similarly, to make use of an inadequate earthly parable, a locomotive requires a certain amount of steam power to put itself in motion, and a 63 certain amount of additional steam to enable it to pull the cars that are coupled onto it. The car coupled onto your spirit is your body, for which your spirit requires special additional odic power. However, the odd set aside for the body differs from that set aside for the spirit, since anything that is to act upon matter must be assimilated and adapted to it to some extent. Hence the odd of earthly bodies is less spiritual than that of the spirits inhabiting them. The physical odd resembles your terrestrial power currents, which are neither purely material nor purely spiritual. Their true nature is unknown to you, although you experience their effect on a daily basis. For your terrestrial power currents you employ material conductors, designed to carry a current of the strength best suited to your needs. You have machines and equipment of all kinds, and plants whose operation requires current of a certain strength. If the current is too powerful, it will destroy your equipment. If it is too feeble, the equipment will stop running. In like manner the odic current of all physical beings is carried by a conductor throughout the body with all of its wonderful units, which you call organs, in the required strength. If the current exerts too powerful an effect on a given organ, it will create disorder. If it is too feeble, the functions of the organ will cease. The blood is the conductor of the odic force. If the conductor is destroyed by loss or decomposition of the blood, the odic current also ceases, just as your power currents cease to flow when your conducting wires are damaged by outside agencies or by corrosion. Because blood is the conductor for the odd, and hence physical life is impossible without blood, the Bible calls blood the seat of life, Blood is the seat of life. Deuteronomy 12:23. The physical odd is not created by the spirit of the respective body, but is derived from the food taken into that body. In order that you may understand what I shall have to say further about odic energy, I must explain to you the nature of matter. Have you ever tried to understand how the bodies of living organisms are formed? Consider your own body and its growth. Was it, by any chance, built up by adding on finished substance, as a house is built by placing one stone upon another? You know for yourself that your body was not built up in this way. The body is nothing but odd condensed into matter, and this is true of all bodies, not only those of human beings, but also those 64 of animals, plants and minerals. Their growth and their taking material form are subject to those self-same laws of odic condensation. The odd of individual material organisms comprises a mixture of odd of the most varied strength and kinds, produced by wonderful laws unknown to you mortals. The mixture is different in human beings than in animals, different in animals than in plants, and different in plants than in minerals. This difference in odd mixture obtains not only between the primary stages of nature, but also between individual organisms within the same stage. Thus the odic composition of the various human races differs. That of the Negro is not the same as that of the white man or of the Indian. Furthermore, not all members of the white race have the same odic composition. This is true also for all the other races of mankind. Every individual has his own odic composition. There are, therefore, no two human beings with exactly the same odd, and the same applies to animals, plants and minerals. Since, therefore, the physical structure of a living organism results from the condensation of the odic mixture peculiar to that organism, each body has its own individual physical properties. In every living being, flesh, bones, nails, hair, and all other parts of the body have their distinctive characteristics, which are based on the odic composition of the individual in question. In your human eyes it is one of nature's deep secrets how odd, which exists in an ethereal form and is invisible to you, can be condensed into tangible matter. That it is possible you know from your own daily experience, for you can see that your body does not grow by the direct application to it of finished matter. You know that the acorn does not grow into an oak by having more and more bits of oak wood attached to it, but that its growth represents a process taking place within the organism. You know, furthermore, that the food you eat does not attach itself to the inner surfaces of your body and promote growth in that way, but that an unknown something flows into all parts, great and small, of your entire body, condensing into flesh, bone, nails, hair and other tissue, and by thus condensing becomes matter. That something, which is unknown to you, is odd. Where, you may ask, does this odd, which is so necessary for the formation and support of all living beings, come from? You can find the answer yourself, if you stop to think about what the needs of your physical existence are. You require air, water and food. But not everything present in the air, water or food can be utilized by the body. Above all, it cannot be 65 assimilated by the various parts of your body in the form in which it occurs in the air, water or food, that is to say, not in its material form. Even air is matter. Everything must first be converted into an ethereal form, and conducted in the form of odd to all parts of the body, great and small. The conversion of the material nutrients into odd proceeds by way of the dissolving that takes place in your bodies during the process of digestion. The air you breathe comprises a material mixture of odd, from which your lungs extract only those parts of the odd that your bodies require, exhaling those they cannot use, in the process of breathing. Water also has an odic composition of its own. The odd of water is needed most of all by the bodies of human beings, animals and plants, for these bodies are for the most part a condensation of the odd taken from water. Therefore, water odd predominates in the foods derived from the plant and animal kingdoms, so that when you eat this food, you generally also receive the necessary quantity of water odd. Because the odd of water plays so important a role in all bodies, they cannot go without it for any great length of time. Your professional fasters may be able to do without solid food for weeks on end, but if they were deprived of water, they would soon die. For the same reason animals and plants perish when denied the odd of water for a prolonged period. Now you also understand why the torture of thirst is the greatest torture that any living being can experience. It constitutes death in its most painful form. The odd of the air is needed not so much for building up the structure of the body, but mainly for producing the various power currents that carry out the dissolving of food and its conversion into odd, the mixing of the various kinds of odd, and finally their ultimate condensation into bodily matter. All dissolving is caused by hot odic currents and all condensation by cold ones. For this reason you cannot live more than a few moments without the odd of the air, for where this is absent, all other odic activity ceases automatically. Now we still need the answer to the question, where does the odd found in air, water and food come from? It comes from the earth, which as a heavenly body possesses an odic mixture and an odic radiation that contain every kind of odd required for the support of all living beings on it. The terrestrial odd consists of the odd peculiar to the earth as a heavenly body. In addition, the earth absorbs into its own odic mixture the odic radiation of all the heavenly bodies within. 66 Range of the earth. Each of these heavenly bodies has a specific odd peculiar to itself, of a nature and composition not found in any other heavenly body. According to the position of those heavenly bodies with respect to the earth, their odic radiation will have a greater or lesser effect upon it, and since the position of the heavenly bodies relative to each other changes every second, the odic radiation sent to the earth by those bodies will vary accordingly. The blending of the odd of your earth with that of the heavenly bodies around it is of the greatest importance to life and growth upon the earth. You must also remember that every kind of odd possesses powers peculiar to itself. To the extent, then, that the bodily odd of an infant at the moment of its birth stands under the one-sidedly strong influence of the odd of one or more heavenly bodies, to that extent the infant's own odic composition will be affected. At the time of birth, this composition is, as it were, still fairly neutral, but at that instant it is given a fixed permanent trend by the odic radiations and mixtures acting upon it. If, in producing a mixture in a glass, you pour in a large amount of one substance, that reduces the amounts you can add of other substances. The whole mixture will then be characterized by that substance of which you added a large amount in color, smell, taste and other external features. You cannot later reduce the amount of the substance of which you added too much, nor can you dilute it by adding larger amounts of other substances, for the glass cannot be filled beyond its capacity. The same is true of the odd mixture of a newborn infant. The total amount of odd is predetermined and cannot be increased. If, now, a particular type of odd constitutes the major component of the whole, it will determine the infant's growth and development for all time. Since the different odd types each develop completely individual vital energies, the particular nature of the major component of the odd will give to the newborn infant in addition to its individual physical characteristics an individual set of character traits. It is, therefore, neither superstition nor idle fancy to assume that one can draw conclusions about a person's physical nature and character from the moment of his birth. The influence of the odd of the heavenly bodies upon your life on earth, upon your vital energies, your character and your temperament is much greater than you realize. You yourselves have a saying, "He was born under a lucky, or an unlucky, star." This refers to the effect exerted by the odic radiation of a heavenly body on living beings at the moment of their birth. 67 All this is so closely related to the great questions of the destiny of human beings that I could not entirely refrain from speaking of it. All bodies of terrestrial beings are therefore condensed odd, derived from the odic radiation of the earth and that of its surrounding heavenly bodies. An example taken from nature will illustrate to you this process of dissolution and condensation. You know that moisture from the ground and from bodies of water evaporates under the influence of heat, although this is generally imperceptible to your eyes. At a certain height above the earth, the vapor, which was invisible at lower levels, condenses into a thin, barely perceptible veil of mist. As condensation progresses, this veil becomes distinctly visible as a cloud, which grows denser and denser under the influence of cold, until, after condensing even more, it falls to the ground as rain or snow. If the water is chilled still further, it condenses into ice and becomes a solid. Here you have the condensation, step by step, of an ethereal substance invisible to your eyes into solid matter, which you cannot only see and touch, but which also exhibits considerable resistance. Thus the sheet of ice that covers your streams, ponds and rivers is solidified water, of the same composition and distinctive properties as the water from which it is formed and which in turn is condensed vapor. Thus, just as vapor rises from the earth and step by step turns into solid matter as ice, only to dissolve again into water and back into vapor, so it is with all terrestrial bodies. They are derived from the odd of the earth, invisible to you, which is condensed into matter by the process of growth and which returns to the odd of the earth after the death of the living organism. The words of earth thou art, to earth shalt thou return therefore apply to all terrestrial beings. This is the continual cycle that will endure until all matter is finally dissolved into odd and not recondensed into material bodies. Later I will have more to tell you about this. From what I have said you can deduce that in every terrestrial being there are three forms of odd: the odd of the spirit embodied in this being, the somewhat more condensed odd that is still invisible to the human eye and that is the body's life force, and the odd that has become solid matter, which you call the body. The odd representing the life force of the body always remains connected with the odd of the spirit and hence with the spirit itself. It is the bodily fuel under the control of the spirit, just as your terrestrial power current is the fuel at the engineer's command. If, therefore, the fuel for 68 the body is diminished below the point required to maintain life, the spirit departs from the body and corporeal death ensues. Similarly, the machinist abandons his machine when he can no longer keep it running for lack of power. When terrestrial bodies die, the odic force remains with the spirit, for earthly bodies possess no independent odic force of their own, only the spirits that have taken possession of the bodies have such force. Nevertheless, the spirit can with its own odic force through the exercise of its willpower strengthen the odd of its body, which may have become weakened by sickness. It can stimulate the activity of sluggish bodily organs and thereby eliminate injurious matter from the system. In these circumstances it is of course essential that the weakened body avoid eating harmful foods, and that it promote the effect of the spirit odd by means of a wholesome diet. To use another concrete metaphor, the spirit in this case works by its own odic energy like a powerful pressure pump upon the physical odd and on the conductor of the odic current, namely, the blood. How much strength the spirit of a person can infuse into the physical odd of its body through its own odic force by exercising its willpower can be seen through numerous occurrences. Often paralyzed persons threatened with great danger receive such strengthening of their bodily odic force through the willpower of the spirit, which is focused on saving the individual, that their paralysis is gone and the use of their limbs is restored to them, at least temporarily. The same effect is produced by a patient's heightened hope for healing. This is also an act of will, and, through the strength it imparts to the odic force of the body, it leads to many sudden recoveries, which you regard as miracles. Willpower expressed in courage, hope, faith and cheerfulness is therefore the best remedy and, incidentally, the best safeguard against contagious diseases. The odd of the body, reinforced by willpower, forms as it were a protective wall that prevents the entry of noxious germs. The greater the willpower, the stronger this invisible armor. A spirit's lack of willpower, despondency, fear and timidity have the opposite effect. They act like a suction pump that draws the physical odd, together with the blood, inward out of the body and its organs, thus weakening the system and paving the way for infection. Just as the spirit is able to lend strength to its body's physical odd when this has become weakened by sickness, so the odic force of healthy 69 persons may be transmitted to, and invigorate, the sick. Odic transmissions of this sort are what you call magnetization. Od can be transmitted by any living being to another, not only from human to human, but also from humans to animals, plants and minerals. By transmitting your own personal Od to plants you can promote their growth. You can magnetize water, oil and similar substances, infusing them, as it were, with your Od, and thereby hasten the recovery of the sick who drink of that water or who are anointed with that oil. Man can also use the Od of plants, beasts and minerals for his own healing. It is upon this reciprocal transfer of Od that the laws of healing power within God's creation are based. Thus the skin of many living animals radiates a particular Od that has healing powers. The healing power of many plants is widely known, although unfortunately the people of today are not as familiar with the curative properties of specific plants for the various diseases as were the people of ancient times. The same is true of the minerals. Most people think it superstition to believe that every precious stone has an odic power of its own, and yet it is precisely the Od of precious stones that possesses unusual purity and strength and invigorates the persons wearing them. It is, of course, essential for the wearer to select the stone that is best suited to his personal Od and one that does not contain odic forces that conflict with the individual's own odic radiations. You have books that will instruct you further as to which precious stone is best suited for which individual, depending on the wearer's date of birth. A very important factor in all healing is the transmission of Od from one person to another. A sick child soon feels better when its healthy mother snuggles it against her body, for by so doing she transmits her own healthy Od to the sick child and strengthens the latter's Od, which has become enfeebled by sickness. A healthy person who sleeps with sick or old people imparts a share of his odic force to them. His sick or old bedfellows are invigorated thereby, while the healthy person grows steadily weaker by the continued expenditure of his Od. That is the reason why healthy persons who sleep with old or sick people for any great length of time take on a sickly appearance, which is a consequence of the weakening of their own odic force. For this reason children should not be allowed to sleep in the same bed with old folks. Od flows through all parts of terrestrial bodies and radiates even a bit beyond them. This radiation that surrounds terrestrial bodies has been called aura by your scientists. Everything in creation has such an odic aura, even the great heavenly bodies. What you call the gravity of the earth. 70 is its power of odic radiation, whose range bears a specific relation to the size of the globe. This is also true of all other cosmic bodies. There is not a point anywhere in the universe that is unaffected by the odic radiation of some heavenly body. The odic aura surrounds the material body at an equal distance from every point. Consequently, the aura has the shape of the body to which it belongs and which it encompasses. For this reason one speaks of the odic body, or the astral body, or the fluid body, of material beings, as distinguished from their material bodies. It is what the Bible calls the spiritual body. It is not visible to your corporeal eyes, but so-called clairvoyants endowed with the gift of spiritual sight can see these odic radiations or odic bodies. The spirit is the source of life, but the scope and the activity of your lives are determined by the odic force connected with the spirit and hence called the life force. This force manifests itself in vibrations of the Od. Every expression of intellectual life, every expression of life about you in nature, all natural forces are odic vibrations. All thought and all volition are expressed in the corresponding odic vibrations, set in motion by the spirit, as the bearer of the Od. Every physical sensation, every mental emotion is caused by odic vibrations. All tones, colors, odors, tastes and tactile sensations are produced by specific odic vibrations. In the spiritual world these are vibrations of the pure ethereal Od. In material creation, they are vibrations of Od in its more or less condensed form. Everything that you see on earth, all growth, blossoming and ripening, all power currents and radiation, electricity, radio, ether waves, light, darkness, all the nuances of tone, color, odor, taste and touch, all power currents in the universe, the force of gravity exercised by the heavenly bodies and their motion in space, everything rests upon these odic vibrations. A sage of ancient times observed, everything is in a state of flux. He should have said, everything is in a state of vibration. The great divine secret of numbers is based on the vibrations of the odic force flowing through the entire universe and permeating its tiniest particle. You little humans will never fathom this secret. You seek the unity number in world events, but you will not find it. It is true that you have discovered many facts connected with this secret of numbers. You know the number of vibrations that produce the notes familiar to you, and you are trying to discover the number of odic vibrations on which the colors are based. But what does all that represent in the vast ocean of truth inaccessible to you? You cannot break the 7 seals of God's creation, you can only bow your 71 heads in wonder and reverence before the Almighty's wisdom and omnipotence. From what little I have told you about odic vibrations, let us now draw a few conclusions that are important for our purposes. You will find that it stands to reason that harmony in odic vibrations stands for beauty, health, happiness, peace and good fortune, whereas disharmony in these vibrations must be the cause of ugliness, sickness, suffering and unhappiness. Just as disharmonious tones and colors offend your aesthetic sense and, as it were, actually cause you mental pain, so it is on the spiritual plane when a created spirit loses its harmony with its creator. The disharmony is reflected in corresponding vibrations of the spiritual odd. It produces spiritual ugliness, sickness, discontent and unhappiness, in short, spiritual suffering, which grows in the same measure as the spirit's disharmony with God increases. The extreme of disharmony, where the created spirit and its maker are total opposites, thus also means the greatest measure of spiritual anguish and misery. It is what you call hell. And since the greatest disharmony in odic vibrations also represents the greatest contrast to beauty and light, which presuppose the most perfect harmony, so hell must be a condition of the utmost ugliness of the odic body and of the most profound darkness. These conclusions are based on eternal laws. It is not God who throws you into hell, but your disharmony with everything good and beautiful, with everything that is spiritually wholesome and pure, with light and life. That is why hell is spiritual death, into which a person plunges whose spiritual nature is in greatest contrast with the divine nature. Disharmonious odic vibrations of the spirit are the diving rudder of spirit flight, whereas harmony is the elevating rudder. The most important task of every living being is to banish this disharmony out of its spiritual life. However, the odic vibrations of living beings are influenced not only by the thoughts and moods of their own spirits, but also by those of other beings whose odic vibrations they take in. If, therefore, clairsentient people come into close enough contact with the odic vibrations of others, they will take in their feelings also. This law is the basis for the ability to feel one's way into the sensations, character, way of thinking and fate of another person. All odic vibrations in a living being leave behind in their own odic bodies impressions similar to those made by the vibrations of the notes of a song on a phonograph record, allowing that song to be rendered audible again and again afterwards, and not simply as far as the notes are concerned, but with the same expression of feeling the singer gave to the song while 72 singing it. This is also the basis of the power of memory. The deeper the impressions made on this odic plate, the more easily they can be recalled. The same process that takes place in material form in the case of a phonographic record goes on spiritually in the case of the sensations impressed on the consciousness of clairsentients as soon as they come into close enough contact with the spiritual odic record of another person. This contact produces in their own odd the same vibrations, and consequently the same sensations, as those present on the records of the other person. From what you have learned, you know that specific vibrations of odic force produce not only a specific tone, but also a specific color, smell, taste and tactile sensation. The sensations of cold and heat are likewise based on such odic vibrations. There are clairsentients who can see a tone as a color and who can even tell colors by the sense of touch, being able to detect differences in color from differences in the radiation of heat or cold given off by the various hues. Others can discern the emotions of love or hatred, of good or ill will, of courage or fear, of faithfulness or unfaithfulness in their fellow men not only through their own sensations, but in the corresponding colored pictures, and so are able to portray the concepts of love, faithfulness, sorrow, joy, hatred or envy in a colored picture. All this rests on the odic vibrations that accompany their sensations. Odd is therefore also the conveyor of our physical sensations. Hence, if the odd is forced out of a limb of your body, that limb also loses all feeling. The odd may be forced out of the entire body or out of parts of the body in a great many ways. It may be expelled by strokes or by internal ruptures that interfere with the operation of the blood as the odd carrier. Physicians habitually expel the odd by means of anesthetics. Alcohol consumed in excess will also cause the expulsion of odd and thereby bring on partial or complete insensibility. The sense of feeling returns as soon as the body has gotten rid of those foreign substances. Contrariwise, feeling persists even after a corporeal limb has been separated from its body, for the odic body of a terrestrial being remains intact, even after a limb of the corporeal body has been removed. A person who has lost a leg, therefore, still has the odic leg, and since odd is the conveyor of feeling, the person often feels as though he had not lost the corporeal limb at all, even after it is gone. He feels pains in the knee, the calf, the heel or the toes of a leg that is no longer part of his body. Anyone who has undergone amputation will bear out this statement. Because the odd remains with the spirit when the latter leaves the body at corporeal death and is the conveyor of physical sensations, it is 73 possible for the disembodied spirit to experience the same sensations as a spirit still inhabiting the material body. For this reason the spirits of the departed are able to feel pain as acutely as they could during their earthly life. Spirits of those deceased who because of the lives they led have been committed to a lower, inferior, sphere believe that they still inhabit the earth as human beings. This is because, first, they still have the same sensations they had as living human beings. Second, they look upon their odic bodies as bodies of flesh and blood, because the odic body has exactly the same shape and appearance as the material one. And finally, they have lost all recollection of their corporeal death. The odd of each living being has a distinctive odor. Since odd is spiritual in its nature, its odor is perceived through spiritual powers of perception and not through the physical sense of smell. The odor of the odd of each living being differs from that of any other. Just as there are no two individuals with the same physique and the same features, so no two human beings have the same odd and the same odic odor. As every spirit, even a disembodied one, possesses an odic body, so, likewise, disembodied spirits have their own characteristic odd smell, which is the more unpleasant, the lower the spirit. That is why the old books, when reporting of the appearance of the devil, speak of his arriving with a vile stench. Due to the fact that the odd extends beyond the body in the shape of the aura, it can be perceived by others from its smell. Something of the odic scent of a living being adheres to every object that its odic radiations touch. It is by the odic scent that a dog can tell its master's belongings and tracks, and police dogs can trail criminals. Only when the original trail has been obscured by later ones whose odic scent is fresh does it become difficult or impossible to follow the old trail. The odic radiation of a living organism with its characteristic scent adheres not only to coarse-grained matter with which it came into contact, but also to such fine-grained substances as the ether through which the organism passed. Thus everything in creation leaves behind an odic trace of its presence that links the day of its coming into being with the last day of its life. I can best explain this by a material example. If a wagon laden with a finely ground substance, for example flour, is driven along a road, and a constant 74 stream of this substance runs through a crack in the bottom of the wagon to the ground, The course traveled by the wagon can be traced by following the trail of the substance, which is like a band connecting the point of departure of the wagon with that of its destination. Such a band is formed by the emitted odd of every creature on its way through life. It is the trail by which migratory birds find their way back to their homelands, and the swallow finds the same roof under which it had once built its nest. The odic sensitivity of these creatures is extremely well developed. You call it animal instinct. But this instinct is active only so long as they are in good health. Sick animals, because of the weakening of their odic powers, lose their odic sensitivity for following their own or another creature's trail. For this reason migratory birds that are in poor health cannot find their way home, and a sick dog cannot follow its master's trail or its own. There are also human beings whose odic sensitivity is so great that they can perceive the odic scent of another individual at some distance and find it pleasant. They find the person likable, or repulsive. They dislike the person, even if they have never met or otherwise come to know the individual in question. Mutual attraction or repulsion at first sight is merely the reaction to odic sensitivity. Hence the popular expression, "They can't stand each other," in German. Psyche and sich nicht reichen. They cannot bear the smell of each other. Odd is among the most wonderful things in God's creation. The odic band not only keeps you in touch with everything with which you came into contact in life, but it also reflects your entire life. Every experience, every act, every utterance, every thought of yours is reproduced by it as in a film. It is the book of life, in which everything is recorded. It is a photographic record that retains and reproduces everything. It is a film that does not lie, and whose revelations cannot be denied. It is the evidence by which you will one day be judged by your Creator. For every terrestrial being its predestined fate is imprinted in its odd from the outset and can be seen both in the odic body as a whole as well as in every particle of the odd. The fate of a being can therefore also be read in the odic particles adhering as emissions to everything with which that being has come into contact. Not all that you do or suffer in life is predestined. Most of it results from the self-determination of your own free will. Only the general path of your lives, together with certain turning points along that path, is predestined. What you do while traveling that path and how you act at those 75 turning points is for you to decide. That is your responsibility. Your life has one purpose only, to raise your spirit to a higher level on the road that has been mapped out for you, to bring it nearer to God. Your path through life is one of tests. Its nature and length are fixed in advance. These you cannot change. The turning points on that path are intermediate exams, and corporeal death is the end of the path. Whether you do your duty as you go along the predestined path or not depends on your free will. Whoever passes the final examination, his spirit will continue to progress in the beyond until it reaches its final goal, union with God. Whoever fails must take the tests over again until he can pass them. Passing or failing are not predestined, but depend on your own merit or shortcomings. The Christian religions do not recognize this truth. They do not know that the Creator works like an architect who first draws the plans according to which a building is to be constructed. These plans do not give all the details of the interior construction of the building or of the materials to be used for that purpose, but only the outer contours. In a like way, God has laid out the major lines for the life structure of every individual, according to which life is fixed in outline, leaving each person free to decide upon the interior details. There are many references in the Bible to the fact that man's fate is predestined. Man does not even know the hour that has been set for him. Ecclesiastes 9:12, all the days of my life were set down in thy book ere they ever took shape. Psalm 139:16, and in the book of Ecclesiastes you read furthermore, everything that happens has been determined long ago, and from the beginning it is set what a person will experience, and no one can demand an explanation from him who is stronger than he. The subject is much talked about, but that is useless, for who knows what is good for a person in life? Ecclesiastes 6:10-12, My faith lies in thy hands. Psalm 31:16, the prophet Jeremiah utters the words, O Lord, I know that man's faith lies not in his own hands and that a person going through life may not direct his own steps. Jeremiah 10:23, Their doom is rushing upon them. Deuteronomy 32:35, Birth and death and the span of life that lies between them are predestined and beyond man's control. No one, not even a physician, can therefore save a person's life. Every person dies at the appointed moment. No one has power over his day of death. Ecclesiastes 8:8, Christ confirms this truth with the words, Who is there among you with all his worries who can prolong his allotted time of life by a single span? 76 Matthew 6:27, The Lord said to Moses, See, the time is near when you must die. Deuteronomy 31:14, Just as a human architect can make alterations to his original construction plans, so it is within the realm of possibility for God, by way of exception, to permit changes in any one's destiny. Only he can lengthen or shorten the time of a person's life. As the Bible also tells you, God sometimes prolongs the life of one of his servants who has proved faithful and shown himself to be a trustworthy helper in God's plan of salvation for winning back those who have fallen away from him. Thus to Hezekiah he sends the message, I will add 15 years to your life. 8 Kings 26, he shortens the foreordained lifespan of others because they not only fail to perform the life work allotted to them but try to dissuade their fellow men from fulfilling their duty to God. These bloodthirsty liars will not live out half their days. Psalm 55:24, By bloodthirsty liars the Bible does not mean those guilty of actual bloodshed on earth, but of killing the souls of their fellow men by enticing them away from God. The fear of the Lord prolongs days, but the days of the wicked shall be shortened. Proverbs 10:27, God inspires the prophet Jeremiah to announce to Hananiah, This very year you will die, because you instigated people to disobedience towards the Lord. Jeremiah 28:16, By the blood you have shed, by inducing people to separation from God, you have become guilty, and through the idols you have made you have defiled yourself and caused the days of judgment to draw near and you have come to the end of your years. Ezekiel 22:4, The destiny of the various nations is also foreordained. You do not understand these matters because you have no true conception of the causes and ends of the great events of the world. Above all, you are ignorant of the purpose underlying the material creation and do not know what relationship exists between the incarnated Spirit and God's creation. Of these things I shall tell you more hereafter. I have inserted my remarks relating to destiny because they were necessary in connection with my explanation of the odic force, since otherwise you would not be able to understand what I am about to say about clairvoyance in its relation to odd. Clairvoyants are living beings, humans or animals, whose spirit is able to detach itself from the body to such an extent that its power of vision is similar to that of the spirits of the beyond, which have left their terrestrial bodies altogether. 77 A well-trained clairvoyant is able under certain circumstances to read the destiny of another person imprinted upon that person's odd. He can read the whole past of a person whose odd he sees, and not only the part that was predestined, but also those events that have already occurred as a result of the exercise of the individual's free will. Of the future, however, he can read only what is foreordained, but not that which depends on the person's free will. The manner of a person's death can be foreseen by a clairvoyant only when this also is predestined, for it is not a part of every person's destiny. As a matter of fact, what is foreordained in some cases is left for the individual to determine in others. It is only the hour of death that is predestined for everyone. In order for clairvoyance in this area to be possible, the clairvoyant must in some way establish contact with the odd of the person whose destiny is at issue. He must either have that person before him in the flesh so that the odic emissions can reach him, or else he must touch some object that has been in that person's possession and to which, consequently, some of his odic radiation clings. The ability of a clairvoyant to read sealed letters or to recognize objects he cannot see with his corporeal eyes is also based on this odic radiation. The more powerful the odic radiation emanating from the object, the more distinct the clairvoyant's vision. If a clairvoyant's spirit is able to detach itself completely from his body and actually to leave it, then it is in a position to follow the odic trail of another person and to ascertain his whereabouts at the moment. Not all clairvoyance, however, comes about through odic radiation. Many events that happen at a great distance from the clairvoyant are seen by him at the instant of their occurrence due to the fact that his spirit, having left the body, is present at the scene of the event, or else, even though the spirit remains with the body, because the news is imparted to him by the spirit world through clairaudience or shown to him in a picture through clairvoyance. The future of individuals with whose odic radiations the clairvoyant has not come into contact, as well as the future of countries, peoples, cities and other communities can be seen by a clairvoyant only when it is shown to him by the spirit world by means of pictures. Producing such pictures, which may depict the coming events either with faithful accuracy or by means of symbols, is not difficult for the spirits charged with that task. Odd is the material employed by them for pictures of this kind. 78. The future of nations and other coming events were generally revealed to the prophets of the Old Testament by means of symbolic pictures. Odd also possesses color. This, too, varies for each creature, ranging from the deepest black through trillions of shades to the most resplendent white. You mortals cannot conceive of the diversity of these colors. On some autumn day, study the yellow of the leaves. Among all the leaves that have turned yellow you will not find two that have exactly the same shade of yellow. A similar diversity is to be found in all the colors. I have repeatedly indicated to you where the reason for the great differences in the scent and color of odd lies, namely in the spirits of living creatures. The lower the thinking and desires of a spirit in relation to God, the uglier it is as a spirit. Spirits, too, have shape. Your human spirits have the shape of your human body, or, to put it more correctly, your human bodies have the shape of your spirits. So also the bodies of animals are shaped like their spirits, for the physical body has the same shape as the odic one, and the odic body is shaped to conform completely to the spirit. With the help of the odd the spirit builds up the physical body to correspond with its own image and its own shape. Your so-called scientists will of course ridicule you if you tell them that the incarnated spirits have the shape of the bodies that they inhabit. They cannot conceive of a spirit that has a shape. They believe that only what is material, limited by time and space, can have shape. They are sorely mistaken. Spirits are not shapeless, as indeed there is nothing in all creation that has no shape. Spirits have form and shape, and yet they are not bound by either time or space, as are material bodies. How, unless each of us has its shape, could we spirits recognize one another? The angel Michael is different from Gabriel, and Gabriel from Raphael and other spirits, to mention only these biblical characters. The fact of the matter is, then, that all spirits have shape, beginning with God and his high spirits, all the way down to the most hideously misshapen figures of the depths and to the spirit world incarnated in matter. Beauty is harmony and ugliness is disharmony. That is a law that applies to all creation. The most beautiful face in a portrait can be made utterly hideous by a disharmonious stroke of the brush. In the same way the spirit becomes the uglier in form, and especially in the features of its face, the more disharmonious its attitude toward the Creator, in whose image and likeness it was originally created. 79. Just as the odd surrounding the spirit takes on the latter's shape, so too it shares in the beauty or ugliness of the spirit's color and scent. For this reason you witness, in the materialization of spirits as it takes place nowadays, that the odic radiations of a good spirit give off a beautiful light and, as the condensation of the odd progresses, emit a sweet scent, whereas the odd of low spirits is shrouded in darkness and always causes an offensive smell. It is true that mortals cannot always perceive this scent, as it can be detected by your physical sense of smell only in rare instances. These are facts which your scholars have had ample opportunity to confirm. The harmony or the discord of the spirit is also transmitted through the odic body to the physical body. For this reason a person's character is expressed in the lines of his body, particularly in the features of his face, and even in the shape of his limbs. Those who are familiar with this law can therefore read the character of the spirit from the lines and shape of the various parts of the body. Also the body's posture, its way of walking, and its gestures are expressions of the spirit. For this reason also a person's character can be judged from his handwriting. That is why the messages communicated through a human medium by the spirit of someone who has died will be written in the handwriting peculiar to the sender while he was alive on earth. The handwriting changes only when the character of the deceased has undergone a marked improvement in the beyond. Since a person's destiny appears pictured in his odd-like building plans and is transmitted by the odd to his physical body, it can be read also in the lines and marks of his body. Hence, whoever is familiar with these marks will be able to see at least a part of what a clairvoyant can see more fully in the odd. I could dictate to you a very interesting book on all of these interrelated facts. But it is not my task to enrich human knowledge. I am charged only with telling you enough of these matters to enable you to understand the facts of communication by spirits with the material world, and the laws on which that communication is based. Inasmuch as odd is spiritual in its nature, it also has the property, in common with spirits, of being unobstructed by matter of any kind. In the same way that it permeates its own, physical, body without meeting resistance, it can pass through any other matter, once it has left that body. There is nothing that can obstruct it. You have something similar in the case of so-called Röntgen rays X-rays, so it will not be difficult for you to understand what I am saying. 80. Furthermore, just as in nature powerful forces are developed under the influence of heat, accompanied by the formation of clouds, and become visible in the shape of lightning, so the spirit world can, with the help of the odd, create very powerful energy currents, either hot or cold. In the case of lightning you speak of hot flashes, which melt whatever they strike, and of cold flashes, which do not set fire to things but act only through the enormous pressure they exert. Heat expands and dissolves, while cold contracts and condenses. This is a law that applies not only to the world of matter, but to that of spirit as well. As you are able to convert matter into steam with the aid of high temperatures and even to cause this steam to become invisible to the human eye, so too is the spirit world able to dissolve matter completely. It also makes use of hot power currents, by means of which it converts matter into a node-like, that is, etherealized form. For, as I have explained to you, all matter is nothing but corporealized odd, which can be dissolved into spiritual odd. Matter that has been converted into odd penetrates everything material without meeting resistance, just like all other odd, and it can be transported anywhere and then recondensed anew into matter. You speak of this dissolution of matter as dematerialization and of the condensation of odd into matter as materialization. Whereas the spirit world causes matter to dissolve by means of hot, high-power odic currents, it uses cold currents for condensing odd, in keeping with the general laws of nature. And just as you, when employing powerful terrestrial currents, observe great care so as not to be harmed, so the spirit world takes equal precautions when applying odic power currents. When you handle high-tension wires, you make use of so-called insulating devices. You speak of short circuits and similar contingencies. Likewise, when using odic currents for dematerialization or materialization in the presence of terrestrial beings, the spirits must choose the same care in order to avoid harming these beings and to accomplish the desired dissolution or condensation of matter. For this reason any unforeseen interferences on the part of the participants at a spiritistic copyright with the work of the spirit world may be dangerous for the medium, who serves as the power source, or for the participants, and may make the production of the desired phenomena more difficult or even impossible. For in this field also, such a thing as a short circuit is possible, unless timely provision has been made for the necessary insulations. 81. All this may sound entirely too human to you, but I cannot repeat too often that everything you have on earth in a material state exists also in the spirit world in a spiritual state, and without any exception. It is not easy for you to understand this, seeing that all the concepts of your thinking are derived from the world of matter, and you find it hard to translate these concepts into spiritual terms. The odd with which your own spirit works in your physical body requires a certain degree of condensation, as I have already pointed out to you, for a certain balance must be struck between spirit and matter. For the same reason, the spirit world, when working through corporeal beings, must condense the necessary odd to a degree suited to the purpose at hand. Light and heat constitute great obstacles to condensations of this kind. That heat is a hindrance you will readily see, since heat expands and dissolves. The fact that light may also be a hindrance to the condensation of odd you may at least surmise, when I remind you of the darkroom necessary for the development of your photographic plates. The condensation of odd in the presence of heat and in bright daylight is not entirely impossible, but it requires a quantity of odd so great that it is available to the spirit world for communicating with man only in the rarest instances. Otherwise, for creation and for the performance of a special assignment from God, the good spirit world has at its disposal odic force in unlimited amount and strength. It is therefore foolish and a sign of profound ignorance in such matters for people to ridicule the fact that many spiritistic phenomena can be produced successfully only in the dark. Many of your scientists even assert that darkness is insisted upon only so that spiritistic deceptions cannot so easily be seen. It would be as reasonable to demand of the photographer that he develop his plates in broad daylight instead of in a dark room and to call him a fraud because he can only do his developing in the dark. Unfortunately, almost everybody is ignorant of the fact that the work of the spirit world proceeds according to the same laws as those governing your actions on earth. What might be called odic feeding, a method of administering nourishment by means invisible to the human eye, which seems so incomprehensible to the human mind, is also accomplished by the dissolution and recondensation of odd. It happens that at all times there have been people who took no food whatever and still remained alive. In their case nourishment is administered by spirit methods, the spirit world dissolving the food into odd and 80 to introducing it into the digestive tract in that state. There the odic food is condensed into material food and is digested. For this reason also those people who to you seem to have eaten nothing eliminate waste quite normally, as though they had eaten tangible food. This method of nourishment is always associated with other activities on the part of the spirit world in connection with the individuals in question. It is not an end in itself, but a link in a chain of events serving a higher purpose. From what I have told you so far you will be able to deduce for yourself that sufficient odic power is a prerequisite for every task performed by the spirit world on terrestrial beings in a manner perceptible to your senses. Odic force is the fuel throughout all of God's creation, including the spirit's workshop on earth. The question now comes up of its own accord, where do spirit beings get the odic force they need for their communication with terrestrial creatures? You might conclude offhand that it would be sufficient for spirits to use their own odic force for their work with matter. This, however, is not the case, for spirit beings require their odic force to sustain their own life functions and to perform their work in the spirit world. Above all, however, the odd of the higher spirit world is far too fine and pure to combine with the very differently constituted odd of terrestrial beings. You too have fine substances that you cannot mix homogeneously with coarser ones. It follows that for its work on earth the spirit world must use odd of a type suited to the terrestrial odd, and, as a rule, it finds this odd in those terrestrial beings within whose domain that work is to be performed. Human beings, animals, plants and minerals are therefore the sources of odd from which the spirits take the necessary fuel, and these sources of odd you call mediums. Terrestrial beings that are able to spare sufficient odic force are said to be mediumistic. To a small degree all terrestrial creatures are mediumistic, for all possess odic force and are able to spare part of it, but in most cases their ability to do so is so slight that using them as sources of odd for the activities of the spirit world is out of the question. Even the odic force of the mediums, although it may be sufficient in quantity, is not always fit for immediate use. It must first, in all cases in which it is to be used as a fuel by the higher spirit world, be purified, or, so to speak, filtered. Many of the substances you have on earth must be similarly filtered before you can use them. 83. Of course, the lower spirit world does not need to purify the odd of the mediums, for the more impure this odd is, the better it is suited to the odd of such spirits. Hence it is also much easier for them to use mediums for their purposes, and they arrive at this end much more quickly than do the higher spirits. What I now have to say about the use of odic force you could, as a matter of fact, discover for yourself by logical deduction from what I have already told you. It concerns finding an answer to the question, in what way does the spirit world employ terrestrial odd for work to be performed with material beings? The best and shortest answer would be, it uses the same means your own spirit must use to activate the material limbs of your body in order to perform acts that can be perceived by the senses. So, in most cases, must a disembodied spirit provide itself with limbs of matter to make such activities possible. It does this by clothing its spiritual limbs in the odd taken from mediums and appropriately condensed. Whenever your own spirit wants to grasp a material object, it can do so by means of your material hand. Your physical hand is really nothing but the shell of the materialized hand of your spirit, formed by the condensation of terrestrial odd. If, therefore, a disembodied spirit wants to grasp the same material object, it must first materialize its own spirit hand by condensing the terrestrial odd at its disposal. There is no other way to do it. The materialization need not, of course, be as strong as that of your physical hand. It need not even be strong enough for the spirit hand to be visible to your physical eyes, but still strong enough to grasp the object. If the available odd is insufficient to effect such a condensation, the foreign spirit will be no more able to grasp the material object than you if your arms and hands had been chopped off. It is true, however, that a spirit can grasp and move a material object without materializing its spirit hand, provided that it previously dissolves the object into odd, for matter that has been converted into odd, and hence, etherealized, is directly accessible to a disembodied spirit. Unless such dissolution has taken place, a material object can be grasped by a disembodied spirit only if its spirit hand has undergone materialization, for only like can grasp like. There are many degrees of odic condensation or materialization, from that visible only to a clairvoyant sight to the complete materialization of spirits, in which case they differ in no respect from a material body. The 84 degree of condensation is thus dependent upon the amount of odd available to the spirit world for its purposes. Let me cite a few more examples. Your own spirit wants to speak so that your fellow men may hear what you say with their corporeal ears. What must it do? It must make use of your body's material organs of speech, without them it will not succeed. And when a spirit wants to speak, having no body and, consequently, no organs of speech, what must it do to produce sounds intelligible to human ears? It has two ways of doing this. One way is to materialize its own spirit organs of speech by condensing them with the aid of terrestrial odd. The other way is to condense the spirit sounds by means of the mediums available odd to such an extent that they become audible to human ears. In the latter case, therefore, the spirit does not need materialized organs of speech, but merely the condensed odd of the sounds. You describe this method of speech by spirits as direct voices, which can be heard with more or less volume, according to the greater or lesser amount of odic force supplied to the spirits by the mediums for the purpose of condensing the odic sound. You are visible to your fellow creatures because you have a material body. Your material body, however, is only the material shell of your spirit with all of its organs, for every organ found in your body has its counterpart in a spiritual state in your spirit. If, therefore, a disembodied spirit wants to appear to terrestrial eyes in such a way that it will be taken for a terrestrial being, it must clothe its spirit form with all of its spiritual organs in a shell of matter, which it produces by means of the condensation of terrestrial odd. In the case of a spirit so materialized, the human eye can discover nothing to distinguish it from a normal person. This spirit had skin and bones, all external organs, fingernails, hair and teeth, as well as all inner organs, like a heart that beats, blood that circulates, and whatever else is present in any normal, flesh and blood human being. A complete materialization of this kind requires so much odd that no one medium is capable of supplying it. In such cases, therefore, part of the substance of the medium's corporeal body must be dissolved as well and used for materializing the spirit. For this reason, a medium loses quite a bit of body weight in materializations of this nature. The medium gets it all back, however, after the materialization has come to an end. I am surprised that your scholars who conduct so many experiments in this field do not discover these facts for themselves, for surely they witness phenomena enough to point them in the right direction. They see materialized hands grasping and moving objects. They hear direct voices, and simultaneously they often see the cloudlet of odd out of which these 85 voices are heard. When they photograph some of these phenomena, they sometimes find upon the plate something that looks like a larynx, formed by the spirit by means of the materialization of odd, in order to provide it with a voice. When investigating complete materializations they find everything that is present in a normal human being, and yet they cannot hit upon the track of the truth. The greatest obstacle in the way of recognizing the truth is the erroneous conception of the terms spirit and matter. Once the fact is recognized that the essence of spirit creation is the same as that of material creation, and that they differ only in the nature of their being, most of the difficulties that now prevent a proper understanding of spirit communication with the material world will disappear of their own accord. One will then recognize that created spirits possess the same organism in spirit form that terrestrial beings possess in material form, that the body has been cast over the shape of the spirit, and, hence, that nothing can be contained in the material cast that is not also present in the spirit shape. One will also understand that the beyond resembles the here in every way, with the sole difference that in the here all things are material, and in the beyond all things are spiritual. But all life, in both the material world and in the world of spirit, is bound up with the odic force. This is the most powerful force in creation, and it is the force by means of which God, who is the source of this force, can overturn all things. It is the means by which he and his spirit world perform the greatest miracles, as you call them. It is the force that enables the magician to perform superhuman feats, inasmuch as his own odic powers can be increased by the spirit world, either by the good or the evil spirit world, depending upon which of the two he enters into contact with. In the case of the evil spirits, the demons that have severed their relations with God, this power has very definite limits, whereas God's spirits can make use of it in immeasurable strength. It was with this force that Christ healed the sick and raised the dead. With this force he also cast out the evil spirits from those possessed of them, and with the help of this same force the good spirits enabled Christ to walk on water. This same force was used by the good spirit world under Christ's command to bring about the miraculous multiplication of the loaves at his behest, by means of the materialization of the bread that had been brought there as odd. Christ promised this same power to all who would believe in him. And for those who believe, these miracles will follow. They will cast out 86 evil spirits in my name, they will talk in foreign tongues, they will handle serpents, and if they drink something poisonous, it will not harm them. They will lay hands on the sick, and make them well. They, the 11 remaining apostles, however, went out, and preached everywhere. The Lord was with them with his power, and confirmed their word through the miracles that accompanied it. Mark 16:17-20. For a belief in God that is not only a belief in His existence, but an unshakable faith in Him and faithful obedience to His will brings a person into the closest union with God, who is the infinite source of power. Such belief will also place God's spirit world at the service of that person, and his faith will render him capable of all things. Everything is possible for one who believes. Mark 9:23. Every true believer in God will therefore experience those things that were fulfilled in Christ, namely, if we do as God wills, God will also do what we want.